And now that it is 9 o'clock, we'll get started and I'll say good morning to everyone. Hi, welcome to an exciting Facebook Live with Animal Wellness Action. I'm Joseph Grove, host of the Animal Wellness Podcast, and I'm sure glad you're with us. The reason for our event is to discuss and celebrate the passage yesterday of the Big Cat Public Safety Act, which is now on its way for expected signature by President Biden. It was a great day for animals and a great day for the thousands of our supporters who have shared our social media posts, called and written their legislators, and donated to animalwellnessaction.org to help fund our work. Three guests are with me. Carole Baskin, CEO of Big Cat Rescue and star of Netflix's The Tiger King. If you don't know Carole by now, you clearly have not been connected with the modern world, and you need to wake up and have some coffee because we all know Carole and we love Carole, and we're glad she's with us. Wayne Pacelli, founder of Animal Wellness Action and the president of the Center for a Humane Economy, is here too. And we're also joined by Marty Irby, the executive director and chief lobbyist for Animal Wellness Action. So folks, welcome. Carole, it's good to talk to you again.
Joseph, I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention we're blessed with another great guest, Howard Baskin, who's been leading us in this fight for the Big Cat Public Safety Act as well. So I just want to make sure you see him as well.
Harold, I apologize. I am so sorry. I've never had the pleasure of talking with you directly, and I was amiss to skip right over you. So thank you for joining us. We're glad you're there. Really, I thought you were Carole's security bodyguard. So I didn't know that. That's right.
You're not connected with the modern world, Joseph.
Yeah, clearly I'm not connected with the modern world.
Howard is almost as famous. He's half as famous as Carole.
Well, typically, Joseph, we don't use my name. We just refer to me as Carole's husband.
Carole and Carole's husband are with us today. So, all right. Well, very good, sir. Thank you. And I apologize for the oversight. But Carole, it is good to see you again. And I want to start off with you, please. What does passage of this big act yesterday mean for big cats?
Well, first, I want to say to all of your audience, hey, all you cool cats and kittens, thank you for joining us today because you are the ones who made this happen. And the immediate effect will be that there will no longer be dozens, if not hundreds, of lion and tiger cubs bred for the purpose of being used for a few months as photo props and then discarded into private homes. And it will phase out those private exotic owners that are a dumping ground for all of these cats once they age out, when they are just a few months old and can take a finger off. But I think even more importantly, this is the very first step towards saving the tiger in the wild and all of the other big cats. We had to clean up our mess in America before we could ever be any kind of an authority on the world stage.
Oh, you're muted, Joseph.
I was afraid you were going to say I was muted.
No. I'm glad Wayne's role on this is to keep me in check. So thanks, Wayne. I think that's what a lot of people don't realize too about this whole issue, Carole, is that a lot of these animals are captured in the wild in their native habitats and brought over. So not only does the abuse occur here, it also contributes to the depletion of these animals in the wild. Am I right on that?
That happens in some other countries. It doesn't happen in the US, that they're brought in from foreign countries for the most part. But the problem is we have this huge smokescreen of what had been legal activity that was covering for all of the illegal activities like poaching in the wild. And so by not having hundreds of big cats ending up in that illegal trade for their parts in the US, now we can look to other countries and say, you need to regulate what you're doing with these animals as well.
Good. It's nice when the United States can take a leadership role. Another thing I think that surprised me and surprises a lot of people is just how much of a cost it is. Up to $1 million, is that right, to take care of one of these big cats for their lifespan once they end up in captivity? Harold, I'll let you answer that.
Howard.
God.
That's okay.
Clearly, I need more coffee before we do these Facebook Lives at 9. Howard, I'm so sorry.
That happens so often. I've been thinking about changing my name to Harold. We figure just the food and medical care, average medical care for a tiger is about $10,000 a year. And then when you load onto that, the overhead that it takes, the people that have to deliver that food and all of the other costs that go to a sanctuary, you can be talking about $100,000 a year per per tiger, and a tiger that you take in even at 10 years old can live to 20. So that's where you get the possibility of it costing over the life of a tiger $1 million or more.
And let me just say, if I might, to augment that, you should also have construction costs. These animals are big and powerful. They need space. There's a land cost. There is an architecture cost, a fencing cost. So it's an immense responsibility that is foisted upon groups that are not part of the problem. They're trying to fix it, but they're the ones that absorb this cost. And, Big Cat Rescue and other big cat rescue-like organizations don't have a pile of money laying around. I mean, this has just been an unfunded financial liability on these organizations for decades. And we really tried to convey that to the Congress, that there is a real cost to people in our society, and that's one of the costs.
And the biggest source of these animals that end up with us is this cub petting, because that's what drives this massive amount of breeding, because they need cubs a constant supply, because they can only use them for 3 or 4 months, and then nobody knows what happens to them after that. There's no tracking, so they end up in private hands and eventually in our hands. By stopping the cub petting, the incentive to do that kind of breeding just disappears immediately. There will still be some breeding. Roadside zoos want to have a tiger, but they only need a very limited number of tigers, unlike the cub petting trade, which needs this constant supply.
Right. Fascinating stuff all. I want to go to Marty and Wayne now to talk a little bit about the backstory of the legislative process. This has been a phenomenal adventure, far longer than I would have expected prior to joining the organization to take. And I know, Carole, you participated a lot on the Hill with this as well. And it's been said on some of the podcasts you've done with us that you are the biggest attention getter Marty's ever brought up there, and you've really helped our cause a lot. Marty and Wayne, what did it take to get this bill through? Much more than I would have expected.
Well, I'll jump in here and say first, Carole Baskin is the most famous person because of a picture with Carole. Really, I mean, it was fascinating to see that. Her trips to DC over the past year, we probably did 150 to 200 meetings in person. Really, for the most part, went well, I think, except for the one member of Congress who said he did want his son to be able to pet big cats and was against us. But we had great meetings, too, that stand out in my mind, are the meeting we had with Senator Ted Cruz from Texas that was probably nearly an hour long, and he really took the time to talk through this and think through it. He was very helpful in our case in the U.S. Senate, and Dan Crenshaw was another good meeting in the House. So Texas was pretty good to us. A special thanks to the Texas Humane Legislation Network and Shelby Babusky as well. They did a lot on this front. And Wayne may want to get more into the background because he's been involved in this a lot longer than I have, but it was definitely a lot of work. And Howard, my Mondays at 3:30 are now going to be free, because for years now, we've all had a Monday meeting at 3:30 and Howard gives us a list and we have to check off our list. And if we don't get our tasks done, we get yelled and screamed at and all these sort of things. No, I'm kidding. Howard's the nicest person there is. But anyway, we really have had a machine, a fine-tuned operation in running through this.
Yeah, and Marty, before we go to Wayne, I just want to say I know it's true for all of us that our thoughts are with the Cruz family this morning as they deal with their daughter's situation. Whatever side of the political aisle you're on, we can certainly have sympathy for a father who's dealing with a very difficult situation with his daughter. So I just wanted to mention that on behalf of the Cruz family. Wayne?
Well, that's a good launching off point, Joseph, because I think what this Big Cat Public Safety Act did was unite Democrats and Republicans and remind us that we have a lot of common ground in our culture. We get very polarized in this country, and I really like the connective tissue of animal welfare in our society. It humanizes people on both sides of the aisle. And, Carole and Howard, in some ways were they were caricatured in Tiger King. This was a salacious, multi, episode documentary series that really trumped up this fight between Carole and Howard and Joe Exotic, Passage Maldonado. And, in knowing Carole and Howard for as many years as I have, I know that they were never focused on Joe Exotic. They were focused on him and everybody else who was abusing tigers, lions, leopards, mountain lions, and other big cats in captive settings. And it was their work and their passion that led them to a guy who was, just a tremendous threat to the health of big cats, having 100, he claimed 200 big cats at his place in Garvin County. They had been working on this issue long before Tiger King. Tiger King happened 3 years ago. They worked to get this bill introduced 11 years ago and have been fighting for it. And I've been fortunate to be their friend and a colleague in fighting for it for this amount of time. And they endured a lot. The Tiger King thing was so over the top. It had the beneficial effect of bringing an obscure issue into the spotlight. But the reality is, the people were caricatured in this. But they kept fighting. And, Marty has noted Howard has been quietly working behind the scenes to really engineer and drive the enactment of this statute. And Carole, and smiling at him there, would be the first to concur. I mean, she recruited him. He was doing who knows what. He was banking or doing whatever he was in his profession. And he really threw himself into the animal protection cause. And I love that. I love that when people who are outside of our cause come in. Marty's the same way. Marty was involved in the Tennessee walking horse industry, and his conscience got stirred by the abuse of horses. And now he's, used his great talents to help big cats and other animals. And Howard has been the same way. And, Marty is so right. When Marty set up so many meetings for Carole, we saw that her campaign and Howard's campaign had penetrated the American consciousness, that people finally understood that these glorious big cats, the most amazing predators in the world in so many ways. I mean, they're fast. And, you think of your little domesticated cat and their athleticism, put that into 350 or 400 pounds. Those animals don't belong in our backyards. They don't belong on a chain. They don't belong inside the house. They belong in the wild, or if they're unfortunately the victim of captive exploitation, they belong in a sanctuary that can do its absolute best to try to meet their physical and psychological needs. So this has been a very tough fight. A lot of people think, oh my God, this passed. It's so common sense. Of course it is. But this thing took 11 years. 11 years. You cannot believe how many twists and turns there were in this fight. And I will say again to, Marty did a fabulous job. Carole was incredible, indispensable, just a authentic human being who cares for the cats. And then Howard was just the maestro. He just put so many of these pieces together. And I really, considered him a friend before and consider him a friend now. But from a professional animal protection advocacy perspective, he just did such a great job. So Howard, I just thank you so much and congratulate you and congratulate Carole. The two of you have been the face of this, and we were happy to play an important supporting role to your efforts.
Well, thank you so much for this love fest. But I got to tell you, you are like the Da Vinci of this entire operation. And it was you that inspired me to want to change the laws so that we could protect these animals.
Well, if that's true, then I feel so happy because I always have said that every issue needs its passionate advocate. I wrote about this in my book, The Bond. I found in traveling across the country, there were people who were caring for injured hummingbirds. There were people who were caring for black bears. There were people fighting for farm animals. Carole and Howard, didn't just run a sanctuary. They wanted to stop the larger problem. They could be one of 10 or 100 or 1,000 sanctuaries. And if they just kept caring for cats, they were going to keep flowing in. So they had to stop it at the source. They went up to the place that was polluting and they stopped the effluent from coming out. And this is just amazing. And, you know, we were really nervous. We needed 100 senators. A lot of people don't understand this process. They don't understand that the big ticket items, tax policy or abortion rights or judicial nominations, they get time on the Senate floor. But there's a very finite amount of time. They don't have time to deal with thousands of issues. So occasionally you get issues that show momentum and have bipartisan support in the Senate, but then you need to get all 100 senators. You need Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Mike Lee, all of whom played really important roles in getting this enacted. And you need Dick Blumenthal and Cory Booker. And then on the House side, you need the Mike Quigleys and the Brian Fitzpatricks. In the Senate in particular, you need consensus. We live in a country that seems to be the antithesis of consensus. But one by one, we worked on these lawmakers and we spoke with them. We reached, for their humanity, tried to tap it and found it. And last night we got it done. But I tell you, the House, the top Republican of the House Natural Resource Committee was a strong opponent. He fought us very, very hard. And now he's taking the committee in the House. And unless he really had a turnaround, and it didn't seem like he was capable of this on this subject, because we talked to him a lot. He's a wonderfully nice man, but he just didn't see eye to eye with us on this issue. We were going to be in oblivion. So getting this done yesterday, December 6th, was just a great moment for all of us. And now Carole and Howard can hang out with their kitties at Big Cat Rescue more.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners will want to know, Carole and Howard, what is next for you, right? You've had this great victory. What's next? I don't think either of you is the kind of person to just sit back and take it easy now.
Well, I really think the next big challenge is going to be getting law enforcement to actually enforce this law. And I think it's going to be up to the community, the animal welfare community, to put together the list for them of who these exotic animals are, or exotic animal owners are, so that they can put together their list of people they need to register. Because I don't think the public themselves is going to turn themselves in and say, hey, I've got a backyard full of tigers. It's going to be up to their neighbors to let law enforcement know where they are so that they can be registered. They can keep them. They just can't buy or breed more. You have to know what that starting number is. And I think that's going to be our next big challenge.
And
well, that has started already. I mean, because of the work that all of us have done, but, really Howard and Carole, but also PETA has been very indispensable in this. And there have been a number of other really important big cat advocates. A lot of the people who Carole and Howard have battled against are really in legal jeopardy. I mean, we know about Joe Exotic, who's facing a 21-year, he's in the early stages of a 21-year prison sentence, but his partner, Jeff Lowe, is the focus of a civil action by the United States. Doc Antle, who operates a facility near the coast in South Carolina, near Myrtle Beach. He is facing legal challenges, federal and state, I believe. Tim Stark in Indiana was driven out of the business. So this enforcement has been happening. And what I often say about legislation is not on animal welfare, doesn't just completely change things overnight. It really just closes out and finishes off a problem for which there is already an emerging national consensus. And a generation ago, when these guys really started working on this, there were more than 60 of these commercial cub petting operations. Now there are fewer than 5. But the beauty is now it's going to go down to 0, and none of them are going to come back. Plus, we're going to deal with a bigger issue, more widespread and numerically more significant, of just private ownership for pets, which we have no idea how many there are. And the breeding of these animals is a necessary element of that trade. And that's what one of the things that the Big Cat Public Safety Act stops.
And, a lot of people have been saying, well, what about the circuses? What are you going to do about that? I think this is going to put an end to the circuses because they have to have a constant supply of young animals. Once those animals get to be 5 years old, they become adults and they can't control them any longer. So if they don't have that constant supply, which is the cast-offs from the cub petting, then I think that whole industry is going away as well.
Well, I think you're very right about along the way, the awareness and the evolution of the attitude about this in society. And one of the clearest examples we've seen is as little as 3-4 years ago, if a celebrity went to one of these places and held a tiger cub, all the comments on their Facebook were, ooh, I want one, I want to do that. And in the last 2 years, what we're seeing is a whole bunch of people commenting, say, hey, don't you know what happens to that cub after it's too big to pet? Why are you doing that? You shouldn't be doing that. So they started getting, instead of positive reinforcement, the public started trashing them for doing it, which was just thrilling to see.
And that wasn't an accident. I mean, that has been all of the collective work of the animal protection groups bringing that message forward that this is such a bad thing to do.
Well, it's been a metamorphosis. I mean, we think about our former Columbus Zoo head, who was on the late night shows, and that was just celebrated, right? And people didn't think. And I think the point that the animal protection movement was making is there's a backstory here that these animals lead a life of privation and misery. Many of them get discarded when they're no longer useful to these folks. And who's caring for them? Who's handling the animals in the back lot? You go to Big Cat Rescue and you go to Scott Smith's Turpentine Creek Wildlife Sanctuary in Northwest Arkansas, and they're dealing with all of the refugees, all of the animals who were victims, who people used and discarded. And fortunately, there's a network of people with a safety net who took them in. But by God, why should they have to do this? Why should they endlessly have to deal with the mess that other people create? And that's why the Big Cat Public Safety Act is such an important law, or will be a law when the president signs it.
Marty, you raised your hand. Let me go to you, sir.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add something. I know we could thank a ton of people on here, but I wanted to just give a special shout out to the National Sheriff's Association and John Blount, their lobbyist, and Sheriff Matt Lutz from Zanesville, Ohio. I talked to Sheriff Lutz last night. He is the sheriff that actually handled the Zanesville, Ohio massacre, where there were 50 or so tigers and lions released out in the public, and kids even at a school bus stop waiting to go to school with tigers loose one morning. Terrible, terrible incident. But I think that was a tremendous help in getting this message across about what could happen. And that's why it's called the Big Cat Public Safety Act, because this is also about keeping people and children safe from harm. And the sheriffs and law enforcement, the Fraternal Order of Police, all of these groups that backed this legislation really wanted to know where these cats were. So this establishes a registration process for all these cats. So if a sheriff or some law enforcement officer goes out, they actually know what they're getting into. Most of these people are tied up with drugs or other criminal activity. And so they know the situation and they don't want to be going into someone's house where they're going to face a tiger or a lion, and so whatever the case may be. So just a big thanks to them and everyone in law enforcement who really helped, because I think that made all the difference in the world as well.
Yeah, and I want to also mention, if I might, Joseph, I'm sorry to be continuing to make points on this, but there's so much in the backstory here. When Marty and I were with Carole on Capitol Hill, and she got such attention, and we talked to people about big cats and the problems of their mistreatment and all of the dimensions of this problem. As Marty said, the public safety issues, the law enforcement threats, the other threats to first responders, and the threats to the cats domestically and in the wild. Carole also allowed us, and she advocated for another bill that we were working on, the FDA Modernization Act. That set of conversations, once we were done with big cats, opened up the FDA Modernization Act, and we built more relationships and more support for that bill, which is also on the cusp of passage. So Carole and Howard are broad-minded animal people. They worked on this issue with us as well, and were very instrumental in getting that bill to the point of success. And when you say, what are they going to do? And Carole says, let's work on enforcement. Absolutely, because this is just a stage in the process. When you pass a law, then you've got to enforce it. The other side of this is the other point that Carole mentioned. We have to care for these big cats in the wild. These are wide-ranging, powerful animals, and they're living in a world that has now eclipsed 8 billion in terms of the human population. That just happened just a few short weeks ago. There is very little space for these animals. There are so many threats looming all around them. Poisoning, poaching, trophy hunting in some cases, habitat fragmentation, degradation, climate change. They are in peril. And now we can make that case about protecting them in the wild as well. Because what a terrible mark on our contemporary generations if we allow the liquidation of these animals in the wild. The tigers in Asia, the African lions, across that continent of Africa, these animals are in jeopardy. I mean, they're thriving in some small pockets, and we've seen some increases in numbers in tigers, but the situation is tough. So we've got to dedicate ourselves to that fight as well.
Well, and that's actually my answer to your question, Joseph, about what's next, because we've been doing that. We've been donating, kind of tithing. We spend $100,000 a year supporting projects in the wild called in situ projects. And a lot of the problems out there are the human-animal conflict, where the animal these are predators, they're taking the chickens, they're taking the goats. And there's a lot of ways to mitigate that where you can accomplish a lot with modest funding. So, up to things like helping these people build predator-proof chicken coops or enclosures for their goats, things like that, and teaching them the value of having these apex predators out there and converting these environments to tourist revenue that then supports these people. So giving them alternative ways of revenue, and there are programs where they seed these people with chickens or goats so that they can make a living with these animals as opposed to hunting the predators. And so our plan is to devote much more of the sanctuary's resources to those kinds of projects now that we don't have to devote resources to the federal bill.
And we don't have a minute to lose.
Yeah. And Carole, I was going to say, as we reach the bottom of the hour, I'll turn it over to you for final thoughts.
Well, we don't have a minute to lose. We really have to do everything we can to save them in the wild. And the two things I learned after Tiger King that people most asked were, why can't you set the cats in the sanctuaries free? And it's because they were born in captivity and raised by people, and they have no hunting skills and can't be set free. And the other is, if we're losing these animals in the wild, then why shouldn't we have them in cages and breed them for future generations? And that's not conservation. The reason they're so important in the wild is because they protect the habitats. They are the apex predators that create that umbrella that allow all of the other wildlife to survive underneath them. And if we don't have healthy streams and forests, we're all doomed to die. So this is not just about people who love cats. This is about people who like to live. And we have to protect these animals if we want to live on this planet.
I didn't know you could talk that fast. From now on, I'm going to always say you only have 1 minute left.
I know, it's I'm a Southerner.
Well, helping animals helps us all, as we often say. Marty, Wayne, thank you for joining us. Carole and Howard, just a delight as always. Congratulations on your big victory, and it sounds like now even equally arduous and important work begins, and we'll look forward to keeping up with you on that. Thanks everyone for watching. I appreciate it very much. You can find information about all of our activities at animalwellnessaction.org and centerforahumaneeconomy.org. I've been your host, Joseph Grove, and we sure do appreciate you on this Facebook Live.